MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked, Episode 1. Top 10 Ideologies that Changed and Scarred Human History. What if I told you there is one idea that started in a library, spread through whispers in taverns, exploded into revolutions, ruled over 2 billion people, and caused more deaths than almost any disease in modern history? An idea that inspired farmers to pick up rifles, poets to become generals, and professors to become enemies of the state. And yet to this day, some still carry portraits of its founders with the same reverence as saints. In this first episode of MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked, we are counting down the 10 most powerful ideologies in human history. Some brought hope, others brought horror, and the top 2 will likely surprise you more than any of the rest. Stay with us to the end. This is number 10, Communism. Not just a word, but an era, a worldview, and for many, a warning. Let us begin where many revolutions are born, in poverty, in frustration, and in the promise of a better world that never quite arrives. It was the 19th century. Europe was buzzing with machines, smoke, and inequality. The Industrial Revolution had created vast fortunes for factory owners and businessmen. But for the rest, the workers, it meant endless shifts, cramped tenements, and lungs filled with soot. Children worked beside their parents. Protesting meant losing your job, or worse, facing police violence. The gap between rich and poor was no longer just economic, it was moral. And to some, it was intolerable. Into this reality walked Karl Marx, a German philosopher with the beard of a prophet and the financial problems of a failed novelist. In 1848, alongside Friedrich Engels, a wealthy factory owner's son who had grown disillusioned with capitalism, Marx published a short booklet that would go on to change the world. The Communist Manifesto. It began with a sentence that echoed like thunder through the capitals of Europe. A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism. The central argument was simple, bold, and explosive, that all of human history is the story of class struggle. That every society, from ancient empires to modern cities, has been defined by the fight between oppressors and the oppressed, and that soon, workers would rise up, overthrow their masters, seize the factories, and build a new society, classless, stateless, without money or private property. A workers' paradise. To quote Marx again, workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. At first, few paid attention. Marx died in poverty, mostly ignored outside radical intellectual circles. But ideas are like seeds. They do not always grow immediately. Sometimes, they lie dormant until a storm arrives. That storm came in 1917. Russia, a land ruled by czars, drained by war, and plagued by famine. Tsar Nicholas II had sent millions to die in World War I. Back home, his people had little bread and even less hope. And in the middle of this chaos came a man with a vision and a plan. Vladimir Lenin. Lenin had spent years in exile reading Marx, organizing cells, and plotting revolution. He believed the time had come. In October 1917, Lenin and his Bolsheviks overthrew the provisional government in Petrograd. Russia became the world's first communist state. Lenin did not hesitate. Land was seized from the nobility. Factories were placed under state control. Banks were nationalized. Religion was suppressed. Enemies were executed or sent to labor camps. A single party took total control, promising to build socialism and then communism in stages. To the outside world, this was radical. To some, terrifying. To many, inspiring. By 1922, the Soviet Union was born. A vast new country stretching across more than 20 million square kilometers and uniting over 150 ethnic groups. It was now a nuclear power in the making, and a beacon for radicals around the world. Lenin died in 1924. In his place rose Joseph Stalin, a man who would transform communism into something far more brutal. But that is a story for another episode. Now, we turn to China. It was 1949. China had suffered a century of foreign domination, civil war, and internal collapse. But at last, the Chinese Communist Party had triumphed. Its leader, Mao Zedong, stood atop the gate of heavenly peace and declared the founding of the People's Republic of China. Mao promised to redistribute land, educate the poor, and modernize the country. He would soon go much further. In 1958, he launched the Great Leap Forward. The plan was to transform China from a peasant economy into an industrial superpower. But instead of building real factories, millions of peasants were told to smelt iron in backyard furnaces. Farmland was collectivized, harvests were over-reported, and food disappeared. Between 1958 and 1962, over 30 million people starved to death. It was the single deadliest famine not caused by war in human history. In 1966, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution. He called on young people to rise up and purge society of bourgeois elements. Schools closed, professors were beaten, ancient temples were destroyed, families turned against each other, millions were imprisoned, tortured, or killed. And yet, Mao remains a national figure. His portrait still hangs in Tiananmen Square. His legacy is taught, his books are sold, and his name is remembered. For better or worse, communism had now spread far beyond Europe and Asia. It took hold in Cuba, in North Korea, in Cambodia, in Ethiopia, in Angola. It ruled more than 30 countries and shaped the daily lives of over 1.5 billion people. In Southeast Asia, the story found a different voice. A poet turned soldier, a man who signed his letters only as Nguyen Ai Quoc, the Patriot. Later known to the world as Ho Chi Minh. To the French, he was a troublemaker. To the Americans, a communist. But to millions of Vietnamese, he was Uncle Ho. Ho Chi Minh studied in Paris. He read Lenin, met with international radicals, and decided that communism could be the vehicle to end colonial rule. He founded the Vietnamese Communist Party and led a decades-long war, first against France, then against the United States. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954 shattered French control. The Tet Offensive in 1968 shocked the American public, and in 1975, Saigon fell. Vietnam was unified under communist rule. Today, Vietnam still follows one-party rule, yet it has embraced market reforms, just as China did, a strange blend of socialism and capitalism, a paradox that confuses many but seems to work, for now. Let us look at the numbers. By the late 1980s, communism had ruled over 30 countries. More than 1 in 3 humans lived under communist governments. These nations controlled roughly half of the world's nuclear weapons. But the cost was staggering, according to estimates from the Black Book of Communism and other sources. The death toll includes 20 million in the Soviet Union, 45 to 65 million in China, 1.7 million under the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, up to 3 million in North Korea, and millions more in Eastern Europe, Ethiopia, and elsewhere. The total deaths attributable to communist regimes during the 20th century range from 70 to 100 million. Of course, not every death was deliberate. Famines, wars, forced migrations, these were side effects. But when an idea leads to so much human loss, it must be examined. Still, communism also brought education, healthcare, land reform, and national pride to many parts of the world. It challenged Western imperialism. It inspired literature, cinema, art, and architecture. Its propaganda posters remain iconic. Its slogans still echo. It inspired both heroes and villains. It gave hope to the poor and fear to the powerful. It demanded sacrifice and promised paradise. And as Marx once wrote, philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. Communism tried to change it, and it did, forever. Today, Marx's dream of a stateless, classless world remains unfulfilled, but the symbols, the speeches, the red stars and the raised fists, they endure. The idea is not gone. It lives on university walls, in street protests, in nostalgic songs and revisionist books. Whether you see it as a vision of justice or a warning from history, one thing is certain: communism is no footnote. It is a chapter, a bloody, brilliant, and deeply human chapter. This is only the beginning of our countdown. There are still 9 ideologies to go. Some brought peace, others brought chaos, and at least one may be influencing your decisions right now, without you even knowing it. At MetaFacts Legends, we rank ideas, but we also explore them. Which part of communism do you want us to dive deeper into? Mao's famine, Ho Chi Minh's letters to Truman, Lenin's exile, Marx's failures as a journalist. Let us know in the comments. Your voice helps shape the next episode. And if you want to explore the original speeches, books, and documents that shaped this ideology, check the description. We have curated a collection you can read yourself. Support MetaFacts Legends by subscribing, sharing, or donating if you believe in cinematic storytelling and bold history. This was number 10, Communism, and we're just getting started. MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked, Episode 1, Entry Number 9. Feminism, the revolution without a gun. They say revolutions are loud, that they come with banners, bullets, and barricades. But what if one of the most transformative revolutions in human history started not with a war cry, but with a question? A woman once asked, "Why is it that our liberty is limited to the right to obey?" Another dared to write, "I do not wish them, women, to have power over men, but over themselves." And from those whispers, a storm was born. Welcome back to MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked. We're counting down the top 10 ideologies that changed and scarred human history. At number 9 is one of the longest running, most emotionally charged, and quietly disruptive forces humanity has ever known. This is feminism, not a chapter in history, but a thread that runs through every chapter. Let's begin where most historians don't, in silence. In the centuries where half the population had no name, no vote, no property, and no voice. For most of recorded history, women were treated as property, not proprietors. They could be traded in marriage, denied education, excluded from inheritance, and silenced in courts. In ancient Athens, women were legally minors. In ancient Rome, the paterfamilias, the male head of the household, could legally kill his wife or daughter for disobedience. And in medieval Europe, even queens were often pawns in marriage alliances. It's not that women lacked ideas, it's that the world lacked ears to hear them. The first tremors of change came in the 18th century, during the Age of Enlightenment, that grand philosophical movement that claimed liberty, equality, and fraternity for all. But apparently, all still meant men. Mary Wollstonecraft, an English writer and philosopher, read the great thinkers of her time, Rousseau, Voltaire, Locke, and saw a glaring omission. In 1792, she published A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, a radical call for educational equality. She argued that women were not naturally inferior to men, but only appeared so because they lacked access to the same education. Wollstonecraft was ridiculed, dismissed, and after her death, her reputation was nearly destroyed when her lover published a tell-all memoir. Yet her work endured, and it lit the match for what would become known as first-wave feminism. The first wave, roughly from the mid-19th century to the early 20th century, focused primarily on legal rights, the right to own property, the right to divorce, and above all, the right to vote. In 1848, in a small town in New York called Seneca Falls, a group of women led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott convened the first women's rights convention in U.S. history. They produced the Declaration of Sentiments, modeled after the Declaration of Independence, which boldly declared, all men and women are created equal. The reaction, most newspapers mocked it, even some male allies thought they had gone too far. But the seed had been planted. By 1893, New Zealand became the first country to grant women the right to vote in national elections. Australia followed in 1902, but only for white women. Finland in 1906, and then a wave swept through the world. By 1920, American women won suffrage after decades of struggle. The 19th Amendment to the Constitution was passed, and millions of women voted for the first time. In the UK, women over 30 gained the vote in 1918, with full equal suffrage granted in 1928, but victory at the ballot box was not victory at home. Women were still expected to marry, bear children, and support their husbands. Work outside the home was frowned upon, sexual autonomy was taboo, and female ambition, often punished, rarely praised. Then came the second wave. It began in the 1960s, fueled by civil rights movements, anti-colonial uprisings, and the frustrations of post-war gender roles. This time, the revolution would not just be legal, it would be cultural, sexual, economic, and personal. At its center was a French philosopher named Simone de Beauvoir. In 1949, she published The Second Sex, a massive 2-volume exploration of womanhood. Her thesis, one is not born, but rather becomes, a woman. In other words, gender is not destiny, it is constructed. De Beauvoir's ideas exploded across Europe and into the English-speaking world. Combined with the sexual revolution of the 60s, and the rise of the birth control pill in 1960, feminism was now reshaping not only the law, but the bedroom, the workplace, and the self. Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique in 1963 captured the discontent of millions of American housewives. The problem that has no name, she called it, the quiet despair of educated women stuck in suburban homes, wondering if there was more to life than cleaning and cooking. Women marched, women wrote, women organized. The National Organization for Women, NOW, was founded in 1966 in the United States. Laws banning gender discrimination in education and employment were passed. Title IX in 1972 prohibited sex discrimination in federally funded schools and colleges, opening the door for female athletes and scholars. But with progress came backlash. Critics claimed feminists hated men, undermined families, and threatened traditional values. Popular media caricatured them as angry, unfeminine, and radical. Some feminists, like Andrea Dworkin and Valerie Solanas, became lightning rods for controversy with their fierce critiques of patriarchy and violence. Yet the movement pressed on. By the 1980s, feminism had diversified. What became known as third-wave feminism emerged in the 1990s, emphasizing intersectionality, the idea that gender cannot be separated from race, class, sexuality, and nationality. Kimberlé Crenshaw, a legal scholar, coined the term to highlight how black women, for example, face unique forms of discrimination not captured by traditional feminist or anti-racist frameworks alone. In Asia, Africa, and Latin America, feminists adapted the ideology to their own contexts, often focusing on access to education, reproductive health, and resistance against domestic violence. In 1994, Rwanda elected the highest percentage of female parliamentarians in the world, a legacy of both tragedy and transformation after genocide. In Saudi Arabia, women only gained the right to drive in 2018. In Afghanistan, girls' schools are still under threat. The global battle continues. Today, we are in what some call the fourth wave, a digital feminism driven by hashtags, viral stories, and online campaigns. Hashtag #MeToo, hashtag Time's Up, hashtag Yes All Women. These movements exposed sexual harassment at the highest levels of power, from Hollywood to politics, from corporations to college campuses. Statistics show the ongoing struggle. Worldwide, women earn 77 cents for every dollar earned by men. Only 10% of heads of state are female. 1 in 3 women globally experiences physical or sexual violence in her lifetime. In 2023, only 7% of Fortune 500 CEOs were women. Globally, women perform 3 times more unpaid care work than men. Only 28 countries have full legal gender equality under the law, out of nearly 200. And yet, there are victories worth celebrating. Female literacy rates have climbed dramatically in the past 50 years. Women now outnumber men in university enrollment in over 100 countries. Female life expectancy exceeds that of men in nearly every nation. Maternal mortality has dropped by over 40% since 1990. Feminism is not a finished fight. It is a conversation, a continuum, and often a controversy. Some argue it has gone too far. Others say it has not gone far enough. There are conservative feminists, liberal feminists, radical feminists, eco-feminists, cyber-feminists. Some argue for equality, others for equity. Some want inclusion, others want revolution. But behind the labels is a simple idea: that women are human beings, that they are not inferior, not destined to serve, not born to obey. As Malala Yousafzai once said, we cannot all succeed when half of us are held back. Today, the fight continues in the courtroom, in the classroom, in the home, and increasingly, in cyberspace. It is fought not just by women, but by men who believe in dignity and justice. It is not a war between sexes, but a demand for fairness across all identities. So why does it rank at number 9? Because while feminism did not dominate empires, drop bombs, or draft constitutions, it reshaped the most intimate structures of civilization, marriage, family, education, and power. It changed not just how we govern, but how we love, how we speak, how we dream. A quiet revolution, perhaps, but a revolution nonetheless. One that continues, one that asks questions no bullet can silence. At MetaFacts Legends, we rank the ideologies that shaped humanity, and also invite you to explore them with us. Which part of feminism should we dive deeper into in a future episode? Mary Wollstonecraft's radical 18th century essays, the rise of feminist movements in the global south, the science behind the wage gap. Let us know in the comments. Your ideas guide our journey, and if you want to explore the original writings of Beauvoir, Wollstonecraft, Friedan, and more, check the description below. We've curated a list of sources and affiliate links for those who want to go deeper. Subscribe to MetaFacts Legends to keep this project alive. Support our mission by sharing, donating, or simply leaving a thoughtful comment. This was number 9, Feminism, the Revolution Without a Gun. 8 more to go, and trust us, they only get more dangerous from here. MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked, Episode 1, Entry Number 8. Buddhism, the idea that conquered without a sword. It is often said that history is written in blood, that every great ideology came riding on a warhorse, backed by kings, fueled by conquest, and remembered through statues of generals. But what if one of the most influential ideologies in human history spread not through battlefields, but through begging bowls? What if it did not promise wealth, glory, or domination, but the end of suffering? This is MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked, and today we arrive at number 8. Buddhism, the idea that conquered without a sword. Let's begin not with a war, but with a man, and not a god, but a prince who walked away from everything. 2,500 years ago, in the lush kingdom of Kapilavastu, in what is now Nepal, a young prince was born into the Shakya clan. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. His father, a king, was told by astrologers that the boy would either become a great emperor or a great spiritual leader. The king, being practical, preferred the emperor option. So Siddhartha was raised in luxury. No suffering, no sickness, no old age, no death, only gardens, gold, and gentle illusions. But like all good stories, the illusion cracked. At the age of 29, Siddhartha left the palace and saw, for the first time, what we might call the human condition. He saw a sick man, an old man, a corpse, and finally, a wandering ascetic. Shaken, he asked, "Why do we suffer? Why do we cling to things that perish? Why does desire rule our lives?" He left his wife and newborn son. He took off his silk robes, shaved his head, and wandered barefoot in search of truth. He meditated under trees, debated sages, starved himself, nearly died, and then, at last, sat beneath a fig tree near the Ganges River. There, after 49 days of meditation, he claimed to have awakened. He became the Buddha, the awakened one. Now pause. Consider this. Every world religion has its miracles. Every ideology has its turning points. But this one begins with a man sitting still and becoming more dangerous to ignorance than any army had been. So what exactly did he realize? The Buddha taught 4 noble truths. First, life is suffering. This is not pessimism. It is realism. Everything we love, we lose. Nothing lasts. Pleasure fades. Youth fades. Life ends. Second, suffering comes from desire, from attachment. We crave, we cling, we hunger, and it makes us miserable. Third, there is a way out. And fourth, that way is the Eightfold Path, a middle way between indulgence and self-denial, consisting of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Notice, there is no God, no judgment day, no chosen people, just a diagnosis, a cause, a prognosis, and a treatment. If that sounds surprisingly psychological for a 6th century BCE doctrine, you're not alone. Many modern scholars consider Buddhism one of the most introspective systems ever developed. But Buddhism is not just a philosophy. It is a lived practice, a community, and over time, a vast cultural force. The Buddha died around 483 BCE at the age of 80, reportedly after eating spoiled pork, which may or may not have been mushrooms. Depending on which monk you ask, his final words were said to be, "All compounded things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence," and strive they did. Buddhism spread across India, then east to Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, China, Korea, Japan, and later Tibet and Mongolia. Let's look at the map. By the 3rd century BCE, the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka, once a brutal conqueror, converted to Buddhism after witnessing the carnage of his own wars. He became a model of nonviolence, promoted moral governance, and sent missionaries across Asia. His rock edicts, carved in stone across the Indian subcontinent, are some of the earliest written records of Buddhist thought. By the 1st century CE, Buddhist monks were traveling the Silk Road, reaching China. There, the ideas merged with Taoist and Confucian traditions. By 500 CE, Buddhism had become a dominant force in Chinese culture, shaping art, literature, and even statecraft. It then spread to Korea and Japan, where it evolved again into Zen, Pure Land, Nichiren, and other schools. Let's talk numbers. Today, there are an estimated 535 million Buddhists worldwide. That is roughly 6.5% of the global population. In Thailand, over 94% of the population identifies as Buddhist. In Cambodia, it's 97%. In Myanmar, 88%. In Bhutan, Buddhism is the state religion. In Sri Lanka, it is constitutionally protected. In China, the numbers are murkier. Official statistics suggest around 18%, but estimates vary due to religious restrictions. In the United States, Buddhism is the 4th largest religion, with about 3 to 4 million adherents. In Europe, countries like France, Germany, and the UK have growing Buddhist populations due to immigration and spiritual seekers. But the true reach of Buddhism is not in temples or census data, it's in ideas. Mindfulness, a central practice of Buddhism, has exploded into a global phenomenon. The mindfulness industry, apps, books, coaching, retreats, is worth over $1.8 billion annually. Harvard and Oxford teach Buddhist-informed psychology. Military programs now include meditation. Corporate leaders use Zen principles. Silicon Valley calls it Buddhism without beliefs. And yet, that brings us to a paradox. Can an ideology that teaches non-attachment survive in a world obsessed with ownership? Can a path that seeks to dissolve the ego coexist with a culture built on self-branding? Even within Buddhism, contradictions abound. In Sri Lanka and Myanmar, militant monks have stoked nationalism and even violence, especially against Muslim minorities. In Tibet, Buddhism became a symbol of cultural resistance against Chinese control, with the Dalai Lama as its spiritual and political leader. In Japan, Zen Buddhism was co-opted by militarist ideologies in the early 20th century, used to justify samurai discipline and even kamikaze sacrifice. No ideology, it seems, is immune to human ambition. But Buddhism has an unusual feature. It rarely proselytizes, it rarely wages wars, it does not seek to convert with force or fear. Its power lies in suggestion, not compulsion. That's why it ranks here, at number 8. Not because it created empires, but because it shaped minds. Not because it built cathedrals, but because it tore down illusions. It taught millions, perhaps billions, that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the absence of craving. That true liberation comes not from changing the world, but from changing the way we see the world. To quote the Buddha again, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Or, you will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger. That's not just wisdom, that's weaponized serenity. Today, in an age of climate anxiety, digital distraction, and political polarization, Buddhism offers a strange and powerful message. Slow down, be aware, let go. Easy to say, hard to live. But perhaps that is why it endures. Because while kings come and go, markets rise and fall, and ideologies burn bright and fade, the search for inner peace never goes out of fashion. At MetaFacts Legends, we rank the ideas that shaped human history. But we also ask, which ones shaped you? Which part of Buddhism would you like us to explore in a future episode? The life of Ashoka, the mystery of Zen koans, the logic of karma, the neuroscience of meditation. Tell us in the comments. Your questions shape our quest. And if you want to explore the original sutras, teachings, and modern interpretations, we've gathered them in the video description. Dive into the sources and see for yourself. Support MetaFacts Legends by subscribing, sharing, or donating. Your energy fuels our storytelling. This was number 8, Buddhism, the idea that conquered without a sword. 7 remain. And the next one, it changed the very idea of what a country is. See you there. MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked, Episode 1. Top 10 ideologies that changed and scarred human history. Top 7. Fascism, the march that shattered nations. What do you call an idea that turned parades into invasions, pride into persecution, and speeches into thunderous roars of submission? What if I told you there was once a time when millions raised their arms in unison? Not in celebration, but in absolute obedience to a single voice. Fascism didn't begin with bombs. It began with a fear of collapse, of communism, of chaos, and a promise to restore order through force. That promise led to the most destructive war in human history and the death of over 70 million people. This is the story of fascism, the ideology that seduced empires and burned the world. Let's start in post-World War I Europe. The year is 1919. The world is reeling from the Great War. 17 million dead, 23 million wounded. Germany is humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, forced to pay crushing reparations and accept blame for the entire war. Italy, though on the winning side, feels betrayed, denied the spoils it was promised. Amidst this resentment and despair rises a man with a square jaw, a thunderous voice, and an unshakable vision of a new Roman Empire. His name is Benito Mussolini. Mussolini, a former socialist turned ultranationalist, coins a new word, fascism, from fasces, the Roman symbol of power, a bundle of rods bound around an axe. Strength through unity, he says, obedience, discipline, action, no room for dissent. In 1922, Mussolini marches on Rome with 30,000 black shirts. The Italian king, fearing civil war, hands him power. Just like that, democracy falls. Fascism is now state doctrine. Mussolini's Italy becomes a laboratory of control. Political opposition is crushed. Media becomes a megaphone for the state. Propaganda saturates every school, poster, and film reel. Believe, obey, fight becomes a national motto. By 1935, Mussolini invades Ethiopia. His test run for imperial glory. poison gas, mass executions, international silence. Let us go deeper into the figure who became the face of fascism worldwide, Adolf Hitler. Born in 1889 in Austria, Hitler was a failed art student who lived for years in poverty in Vienna before volunteering to fight in World War I, wounded and decorated during the war. He returned to Germany to find a broken nation and a shattered identity. For Hitler, the Treaty of Versailles was not just a political humiliation, it was a spiritual betrayal. In 1920, he joined the German Workers' Party and quickly transformed it into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. He was not just a politician, he was a master of theater, timing, and terror. In his speeches, Hitler didn't just speak, he mesmerized. His rallies were choreographed like operas, complete with spotlights, flags, uniforms, and slogans. One of the most disturbing aspects of Hitler's rise was how legally it happened. In 1933, he was appointed chancellor in a coalition government. By 1934, after the Reichstag fire and the Enabling Act, he became Führer. Democracy did not fall to tanks. It fell to applause. Under Hitler, the Nazi state fused party and government, education and indoctrination, science and eugenics. The Gestapo surveilled neighbors. Children joined Hitler Youth. Teachers taught racial theory. Even art was regulated to serve the ideology of Aryan purity. His book Mein Kampf, written in prison in 1924, outlined his vision: overturn Versailles, unite all Germans, eliminate Jews, and conquer Lebensraum, living space, in the East. Most dismissed it as the ramblings of a fanatic, but Hitler was deadly serious. By 1936, he remilitarized the Rhineland. In 1938, he annexed Austria, then the Sudetenland, then all of Czechoslovakia. Each time, Europe appeased him. Each time, he grew bolder. In September 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. World War II had begun. His strategy was blitzkrieg, lightning war, tanks, planes, and infantry moving in synchronized waves to overwhelm opponents. France fell in 6 weeks. Denmark and Norway were taken in days. But Hitler was not just a general, he was a genocidal ideologue. In 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history, sending over 3 million soldiers into the Soviet Union. Behind the front lines, the Einsatzgruppen executed Jews, communists, and intellectuals by the thousands. Then came the final solution. Between 1941 and 1945, 6 million Jews were murdered in ghettos, mass shootings, gas fans, and death camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor. Hundreds of thousands of Roma, disabled individuals, Poles, and homosexuals were also killed. This wasn't chaos, it was systematic, bureaucratic, industrialized mass murder. And still, the German public was not fully blind. While some resisted, many complied, others benefited. Fascism had become a national contract. Security in exchange for silence. Pride in exchange for persecution. Hitler's fall was as dramatic as his rise. In April 1945, with Berlin in ruins and Soviet troops a mile away, he shot himself in his bunker. Germany surrendered days later. The thousand-year Reich had lasted 12. But his shadow lingers. Neo-Nazi groups exist today on every continent. Anti-Semitism continues. The tactics Hitler pioneered, disinformation, scapegoating, spectacle, are still in use. Sometimes in democratic societies. One Holocaust survivor once said, "The dead were dead. It was the silence of the living that haunted us most." So when we speak of fascism, we do not speak only of Mussolini's speeches or Hitler's marches. We speak of what happens when fear meets charisma, when pain meets propaganda, and when ideology becomes weaponized identity. MetaFacts Legends urges you not to see this as a history lesson, but as a living warning. We are not finished with fascism, but it might be finished with hiding. And it wasn't just Germany and Italy. Spain, under Franco, launched a fascist uprising in 1936. The Spanish Civil War became a testing ground for Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. Guernica was bombed, civilians were massacred, Franco won, and ruled until 1975. In Japan, the military government pursued its own brand of fascism, ultranationalist, imperialist, and expansionist. In 1937, they invaded China and committed the Nanjing Massacre. Over 200,000 civilians were murdered. Japan joined the Axis. The world spiraled into global war. At its peak, fascist regimes controlled over 1 billion people across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Then, in 1945, fascism lost the war, but not the argument, because decades later, its echoes remain. Today, politicians around the world flirt with the tactics of fascism, the cult of personality, the demonization of outsiders, the promise of greatness through fear. They may not wear uniforms, but they know the playbook. Fascism, as George Orwell warned, is less about doctrine and more about power. A boot stamping on a human face, forever. So here we are, top 7 on our list of ideologies that changed and scarred humanity. Fascism did not last long, but in just a few decades, it killed over 60 million people, burned continents, and left a scar so deep that Europe built an entire union just to prevent its return. Let us never forget what happens when fear wins, when freedom falters, and when history whispers, but we do not listen. Now, we want to hear from you. At MetaFacts Legends, we don't just rank ideologies, we dig into the stories, the documents, the untold consequences. What part of fascism do you want us to explore deeper? The rise of Mussolini, the psychology of Hitler's followers, Franco's legacy, Japanese fascism and the emperor cult. Leave your comment below. It might just become our next full episode. And if you'd like to explore the archives, books, and declassified reports we've curated, check out the links in the video description. Subscribe, share, or support us if you can. This was Top 7, Fascism. And we're not done ranking the ideas that shaped the world. Next up, an ideology that won with peace, marched with silence, and disarmed empires with the moral weight of justice itself. Stay tuned. MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked. Episode 1, Top 10 Ideologies that Changed and Scarred Human History. Entry number 6, Modern Nationalism, the fire that built nations and burned empires. What if I told you that one idea could unite millions of strangers into a single cause, inspire revolutions across continents, and yet be blamed for 2 world wars, genocides, and ongoing global instability? This is modern nationalism, not the ancient tribal kind, not imperial pride in a royal lineage, but the modern political movement that taught people to say, I am not just a person, I am a citizen, and this land, this flag, this is who I am. Welcome back to MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked. We're counting down the 10 ideologies that changed and scarred human history. And at number 6, we find nationalism, not because it's ancient, but because it's modern, dangerous, beautiful, conflicted, and far from finished. Let's begin where all powerful ideas start, not in war, but in poetry. Giuseppe Mazzini, born in 1805, didn't own an army, he didn't crown a king, but he did write, and what he wrote set fire to the Italian peninsula. Italy, at the time, wasn't Italy, it was a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and foreign occupations, especially from Austria and France. Mazzini believed that Italians, who shared language, customs, and history, should live under one flag. He founded Young Italy, a secret society dedicated to that dream. Without a country, Mazzini once wrote, "You are the bastards of humanity." That idea, that people who share a cultural identity deserve their own sovereign state, was radical in 1830. Today, it's almost common sense. Back then, monarchs called it sedition. Today, we call it self-determination. By 1861, after revolutions, battles, and the red-shirted campaign of Garibaldi, Italy became one nation, and then came the flood. Between 1800 and today, the number of sovereign countries on Earth exploded. from fewer than 50 to over 195. Most of that growth happened because of nationalism. But not all nationalism looked the same. Some came in the form of anti-colonial uprisings, others through romantic ideals, still others through fascist distortion. But we'll get to that. Let's head to India, under British rule. By 1858, the British Raj ruled over 300 million Indians. The British claimed they brought railroads, tea, and law, but they also brought famine, forced labor, and humiliation. Indians had no seat at the imperial table, but they had Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, born in 1869, trained as a lawyer, but became a philosopher of resistance. His tool was satyagraha, nonviolent resistance. He didn't just demand freedom, he demanded dignity, and unlike Mazzini, Gandhi's vision of the Indian nation included not just Hindus, but Muslims, Sikhs, and Christians. But nationalism, like fire, cannot be perfectly controlled. In 1947, India gained independence, but within hours, it was partitioned, violently, into Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan. More than 15 million people were displaced. Over 1 million died. Some say nationalism gave India freedom. Others say it broke it into pieces. Let's travel to Vietnam. If Gandhi was the philosopher of peaceful nationalism, Ho Chi Minh was its guerrilla poet. Born in 1890, Ho traveled the world before returning to Vietnam with two ideas: Lenin's communism and Vietnam's right to be free. To the French, he was a terrorist. To the Americans, a communist. To the Vietnamese, Uncle Ho. In 1945, Ho declared independence, quoting the U.S. Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. Then came 30 years of war against the French, ending in 1954 with the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. Against the Americans, ending in 1975 with the fall of Saigon. Against the Chinese, a brief but fierce border war in 1979. Vietnam lost millions of lives, but gained its national sovereignty. Nationalism, in this case, didn't just fight for an occupation, it fused with ideology to fuel endurance. Even today, Vietnam remains fiercely nationalistic, proudly independent, pragmatically communist, and economically open. And yet, nationalism isn't always revolutionary. Sometimes, it's restorative. Turkey, after World War I, was a defeated, fractured part of the Ottoman Empire. Enter Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, soldier, statesman, reformer. He abolished the Sultanate, secularized the state, and established a new Turkish identity. But at a cost. To build a Turkish nation, minorities were silenced or expelled. Over 1.5 million Armenians perished between 1915 to 1923. The population exchange with Greece displaced another 1.5 million people. Nation building, in many cases, meant identity erasure. And yet, nationalism doesn't stop at borders. In the Middle East, Pan-Arabism emerged in the 20th century, led by thinkers like Michel Aflaq and presidents like Gamal Abdel Nasser. It sought to unite all Arabic-speaking people under one nation. It led to revolutions in Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Libya. But rivalries and Cold War interventions fractured the dream. Elsewhere, African nationalism surged after World War II. From Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah to Kenya's Jomo Kenyatta, leaders emerged with a single mission: throw off colonial rule. In 1957, Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African country to gain independence. By 1975, over 40 African nations had followed. But independence did not always bring unity. Orders drawn by colonial powers grouped ethnic enemies into fragile states. In Nigeria, Biafra attempted to secede. In Rwanda, ethnic identity exploded into genocide. In South Sudan, nationalism eventually led to secession and a civil war of its own. Let's talk numbers. According to the United Nations, in 1945, there were 51 UN member states. In 2023, there are 193. Over 70 new countries have emerged since the end of the Cold War alone. Nationalist movements remain active in Catalonia, Scotland, Kurdistan, Tibet, Kashmir, and dozens more. But not all nationalism is liberating. In recent decades, a new form has emerged: populist nationalism. It often mixes anti-globalization, anti-immigration, and identity politics. From Trump's America First to Brexit, from India's Hindu nationalism to Hungary's Orban, the language of unity is often used to divide. So why does nationalism sit at number 6? Because it's neither good nor evil. It's a tool, a fire. It can light the torch of liberation, or burn down the house of democracy. As George Orwell wrote, nationalism is power hunger tempered by self-deception. At MetaFacts Legends, we don't rank ideas based on popularity. We rank them based on impact. Which part of nationalism do you want us to explore further? Ho Chi Minh's letters, the story of Eritrea, the rise of ethnic nationalism in Europe? Let us know in the comments. You guide this journey, and if you want to dive deeper, we've linked foundational speeches, books, and biographies in the description, including affiliate links to support this project. Subscribe to MetaFacts Legends. Share if it made you think. Donate if you believe in the mission. This was entry number 6, Modern Nationalism, the fire that built nations and burned empires. Next on MetaFacts Legends, an ideology that marched without guns, spoke without hate, and yet shook the foundations of empires. MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked, Episode 1, Entry Number 5. Nonviolence, the power that refused to strike back. What if I told you that some of the most powerful revolutions in history weren't led by warriors, but by men in sandals? That they didn't use guns, tanks, or bombs, but fasting, marching, and silence. That they won not by taking lives, but by refusing to take revenge. Welcome back to MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked. We are halfway through our countdown of the top 10 ideologies that changed and scarred human history. And at number 5, we come to an idea so paradoxical, so powerful, that even empires couldn't defeat it. This is nonviolence, not passivity, not weakness, but a strategy of dignity, discipline, and defiance. Let's begin in India. At the start of the 20th century, it was called the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. But that crown came with shackles. Over 300 million Indians lived under colonial rule, subject to foreign laws, foreign taxes, and foreign bullets. And yet, the man who led him to independence wore homespun cotton and never raised a sword. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, known as Mahatma, the great soul. Born in 1869 in Porbandar, Gandhi studied law in London and worked in South Africa, where he first experienced institutional racism. There, he was thrown off a train for sitting in a whites-only car, despite having a first-class ticket. That moment would change the world. In 1906, Gandhi coined the term Satyagraha, which means truth force or soul force. It was the idea that oppression could be resisted not by violence, but by moral pressure. By refusing to comply with unjust laws, one could awaken the conscience of the oppressor. His methods: civil disobedience, hunger strikes, boycotts, peaceful marches. His most famous campaign, the Salt March of 1930, in protest of Britain's monopoly on salt, a basic necessity. Gandhi walked 240 miles over 24 days to the Arabian Sea, where he picked up a lump of salt and broke the law. That one act inspired millions. He was arrested again and again. In total, Gandhi spent over 2.00 days in jail, nearly 6 years of his life, without ever lifting a weapon. But the British Empire did. In 1919, British troops opened fire on unarmed Indian civilians in Amritsar, killing over 400 and wounding 1.20. The world watched in horror. Gandhi responded, not with a bomb, but with a nationwide day of prayer and fasting. By 1947, after decades of pressure, marches, and prison terms, the British left. India was free, but freedom came with a cost: partition. As India and Pakistan separated, over 15 million people were displaced. Nearly 2 million died in sectarian violence. Gandhi was heartbroken. He fasted again, this time not against the British, but against his own countrymen. His goal was simple: to stop Hindus and Muslims from killing each other. In 1948, at age 78, he was shot, not by a colonial soldier, but by a Hindu nationalist. His final words, "Hey Ram, oh God, let's move west, to America." A century after slavery was abolished, Black Americans still lived under segregation, disenfranchisement, and racial terror. In 1955, a seamstress named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. That act sparked a boycott, and at the center of it stood a young pastor from Atlanta, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He studied theology, he studied Gandhi, and he fused nonviolence with the Black Church's tradition of moral righteousness. King's tool was love in action. His movement's milestones, 1955-56, Montgomery bus boycott, lasted over 381 days. 1963, March on Washington. Over 250,000 people gathered to hear him say, "I have a dream." 1964, Civil Rights Act passed, outlawing segregation in public spaces. 1965, Voting Rights Act signed into law. But his path wasn't paved with applause. King was jailed 29 times, attacked, spied on by the FBI, vilified in newspapers. He knew violence could have brought quicker results, but he chose another way. His philosophy: darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. In 1968, while supporting striking sanitation workers in Memphis, he was assassinated. He was 39 years old. Yet his legacy lives on, in schools, streets, and songs, and in every movement that refuses to fight fire with fire. But nonviolence isn't just Eastern philosophy or American civil rights. Let's talk South Africa. Under apartheid, over 22 million Black South Africans were denied the right to vote, own land, or live in white areas. The regime used prison, torture, and bullets to silence dissent. Nelson Mandela, at first, believed in armed resistance, but after spending 27 years in prison, he emerged preaching reconciliation. "I have walked that long road to freedom," he said, "and I have discovered that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb." In 1994, Mandela became president. His message: forgive, rebuild, do not avenge. Nonviolence won, even after centuries of oppression. But here's a twist: nonviolence doesn't always work. Or rather, it doesn't always look like victory. In Tiananmen Square, 1989, Chinese students protested peacefully for democratic reform. They held signs, sang songs, stood before tanks. The Chinese government responded with force. Death toll, unknown. Estimates range from 300 to 10,000. The footage of the tank man still haunts history. In Myanmar, the 2021 anti-coup protests were largely peaceful. The military responded with live bullets, killing over 1,000 civilians. So why rank nonviolence so high? Because it changed what revolution could mean. Because it showed that dignity is a weapon. Because the most lasting victories, from India to South Africa to the US, were won not just in war rooms, but in jail cells, church pews, and silent marches. Let's talk numbers. Gandhi's Salt March inspired over 60,000 arrests, without any violence from protesters. Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights campaigns helped register over 2 million black voters in the American South. Mandela's Post-Apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission heard over 21,000 testimonies, helping a nation heal without civil war. Nonviolence, at its best, is a revolution not of the sword, but of the soul. So, what part of this story should we explore deeper in a future episode? Gandhi's letters from prison, MLK's strategy meetings, Mandela's secret communications from Robben Island. Tell us in the comments. At MetaFacts Legends, we're not just ranking history, we're retelling it. Together, we've added original speeches, books, and documentaries in the description below. Affiliate links included for those who want to go deeper. Subscribe to MetaFacts Legends to keep this journey alive. Support us by sharing, commenting, or donating if you can. This was entry number 5, Nonviolence, the power that refused to strike back. Next up on MetaFacts Legends, the idea that lit the spark for revolutions. Declared that all men are created equal, and gave birth to both liberty and contradiction. Top number 4, individual liberty and classical liberalism, coming next. MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked, Episode 1, Entry number 4. Individual liberty, it's something most of us take for granted today. The right to speak freely, to own property, to criticize the government, to choose your faith, your profession, your partner, and your destiny. But where did these ideas come from? They weren't gifted by kings. They weren't discovered in temples. They were born in arguments, on paper, and in pain. Welcome back to MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked. We are counting down the top 10 ideologies that changed and scarred human history. And at number 4, we arrive at the idea that dared to say, the individual matters more than the crown. This is the story of individual liberty and classical liberalism. Let's rewind to the 17th century. Europe was burning, civil wars, religious persecution, monarchical tyranny, and then came a thinker who dared to ask, what if government exists not by divine right, but by the consent of the governed? His name was John Locke. Born in England in 1632, Locke lived through the English Civil War, saw the beheading of a king, the rise of a republic, and the return of monarchy. Through it all, he studied medicine, philosophy, and politics. In 1689, he published 2 treatises of government, where he outlined a radical idea that every individual has natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and that any government that violates these rights loses its legitimacy. According to Locke, the purpose of government was not to rule over men, but to protect their rights. And if it failed to do that, the people had a right to overthrow it. This wasn't just theory, it became blueprint. Let's jump to the American colonies. 1776, 13 British colonies, tired of taxes without representation, decided to declare independence, and the man who penned that declaration, Thomas Jefferson, a Virginian with a feather pen, a powdered wig, and a head full of lock. When Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," he was channeling Locke when he added that they were endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He was refining Locke's formula for a new republic. The American Revolution wasn't just a war, it was a gamble on a new idea, that government derives its powers from the people. It worked, kind of. The United States became the first modern liberal democracy, a constitution, a Bill of Rights, separation of powers. But let's be honest, it was imperfect from day one. Jefferson spoke of liberty while owning over 600 slaves. The vote was limited to white, land-owning men. Women were excluded. Native Americans were displaced. Liberty, it turned out, had fine print. Still, the idea spread to France, where in 1789, the French Revolution erupted with cries of liberté, égalité, fraternité. The French Declaration of the Rights of Man mirrored America's on paper. In practice, guillotines, terror, and eventually, Napoleon. But the ideology had already escaped the borders. Throughout the 19th century, revolutions broke out across Europe in 1830, 1848, 1871, each demanding constitutions, parliaments, and civil rights. In Britain, classical liberalism reformed voting laws, limited royal power, and expanded public education. In Latin America, figures like Simon Bolivar declared independence in the name of individual freedom. By the early 20th century, liberalism had become a global force, from constitutional monarchies in Europe to democratic experiments in Asia and Africa. Let's talk numbers. As of 2023, There are 93 electoral democracies in the world, covering over 4.2 billion people. Freedom House reports that 85% of those democracies guarantee freedom of speech. About 90% have regular, competitive elections, and in most of them, power changes hands peacefully. That's not just politics, that's liberalism at work. But like every ideology on this list, liberty has a dark side. Classical liberalism also underpinned laissez-faire capitalism, where the market was king and regulation was minimal. This led to child labor, factory exploitation, robber barons, and boom-bust cycles that devastated millions. The 2008 financial crisis, caused in part by deregulated markets, wiped out over $14 trillion in global wealth. In the US alone, over 10 million homes were foreclosed. Freedom, when left unchecked, can eat itself. There's also the export problem. The West often justified colonization in the name of bringing liberty. Think about it. When France colonized Algeria, or Britain ruled over India, they claimed it was to civilize the natives. Jeffersonian rhetoric was used alongside Gatling guns. But what makes liberty so seductive and so dangerous is its elasticity. It has been invoked to abolish slavery and to justify it, to promote equality and to protect hierarchy, to tear down kings and to erect corporations with more power than nations. Take the case of John Stuart Mill, the 19th century British philosopher who took Locke's ideas and ran with them into the industrial age. In his 1859 book, On Liberty, Mill made a powerful case for the protection of individual freedom, especially against the tyranny of the majority. Mill warned that democracies themselves could become oppressive, not through force, but through social pressure, conformity, and the silencing of dissent. He wrote, "The worth of a state in the long run is the worth of the individuals composing it." Mill also championed women's rights, rare for his time, writing The Subjection of Women in 1869, arguing that a society which denies half its population liberty is one that cripples itself intellectually, morally, and economically. But the liberal tradition has always wrestled with contradictions. The same century that saw liberal revolutions also witnessed the expansion of European empires. As the British Empire spread across Asia and Africa, it brought railways, parliaments, and schools, but also coercion, extraction, and hierarchy. Liberalism promised freedom at home and often imposed control abroad. The United States, too, expanded westward under the banner of liberty, displacing and destroying Native American nations. The ideal of the free individual was often defined against the enslaved, the colonized, and the uncivilized. Let's take a brief detour to the courtroom. In 1857, the U.S. Supreme Court issued its infamous Dred Scott decision, declaring that black Americans, whether free or enslaved, could not be citizens. It was a brutal reminder that liberal language did not equal liberal reality. Even the Constitution, so often hailed as a liberal masterpiece, contained compromises with slavery, including the 3/5 clause. It would take a civil war, over 600,000 deaths, and constitutional amendments to even begin aligning America's liberal ideals with its practice. But the liberal experiment was not over. In the 20th century, classical liberalism evolved into modern liberalism, especially after the Great Depression exposed the vulnerabilities of unregulated capitalism. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal in the 1930s expanded the role of government, not to restrict freedom, but to enable it. He argued that true liberty required more than the absence of tyranny, it required the presence of opportunity. In his 1941 Four Freedoms speech, Roosevelt outlined a new liberal vision: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. It was no longer enough to have negative rights, the freedom from interference. Now, people demanded positive rights, the freedom to live with dignity. In the post-war era, this vision inspired the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, a liberal manifesto for the planet. Articles 1 through 30 spelled out a new global consensus. that all people are born free and equal in dignity and rights. But this too faced limits. In apartheid South Africa, the language of law was used to deny the majority their liberty. In Pinochet's Chile and Shah's Iran, economic liberalism was paired with political repression, or critics call authoritarian neoliberalism. Even in the West, the Cold War saw liberal democracies compromise civil liberties in the name of national security, surveillance, censorship, blacklists, and yet, the idea of liberty refused to die. In 1989, as the Berlin Wall fell, crowds in East Germany chanted not just for bread, but for voice, for choice, for liberty. In 2011, during the Arab Spring, protesters from Cairo to Tunis demanded dignity and self-determination. And in 2019, Hong Kong's streets echoed with cries for freedom, before the crackdown began. In every generation, liberty must be defended and redefined. Today, we stand in a digital age that the Enlightenment thinkers never could have imagined. Algorithms influence our opinions. Corporations collect our data. Censorship can come not from kings, but from code. The line between liberty and license, between privacy and anarchy, is blurrier than ever. Yet the questions Locke and Jefferson raised still burn. What is the role of the state? Where does your freedom end and mine begin? Can a society be both free and fair? And most importantly, who gets to decide? At MetaFacts Legends, we believe that history is not a set of answers, but a vault of questions. Questions we must keep asking. So what do you want us to explore next? Do you want a deep dive into the Federalist Papers and how they shaped American constitutional thought? Should we compare French secular liberalism with American religious liberty? Or unpack the contradictions of liberty in post-colonial democracies like India and Nigeria? Let us know in the comments, and help shape our next investigations. And if you want to explore the intellectual foundations of liberty for yourself, scroll down to the description. We've curated original texts, from Locke's treatises to Mill's essays to Roosevelt's speeches, all with affiliate links to support our work. Support MetaFacts Legends by subscribing, sharing, or donating if you believe liberty still deserves a story. This was entry number 4, Individual Liberty and Classical Liberalism. MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked, Episode 1 entry number 3. Monotheism, the empire of one God. Imagine an idea so powerful. It reshaped calendars, kingships, wars, and weddings. An idea that split centuries into before and after. Commanded the loyalty of emperors and peasants alike, and sent missionaries to jungles, deserts, and frozen frontiers. An idea that still compels billions of people to kneel, fast, fight, or forgive, all in the name of a singular, unseen force. This is not just a religion. This is the revolution of monotheism. Welcome back to MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked. We're counting down the top 10 ideologies that changed and scarred human history. At number 3 is one that built cathedrals, launched crusades, birthed universities, and, yes, spilled oceans of blood. This is monotheistic religion, specifically Christianity and Islam. Let's begin where it all begins, the desert. First, with Christianity, roughly 2,000 years ago, in a Roman-occupied province of Judea, a carpenter's son named Jesus of Nazareth began preaching to fishermen and tax collectors about love, humility, and a kingdom not of this world. He claimed no armies, minted no coins, and died a criminal's death. And yet, within 3 centuries, his name would echo through every corridor of power in Europe. How? The early followers of Jesus didn't build a political movement. They built a community, one that took in slaves, women, the poor, the outcast. In the Roman Empire, where gods came in dozens and citizenship was tightly rationed, Christianity's radical inclusivity was either a scandal or a miracle, depending on whom you asked. By the year 313 CE, after centuries of persecution, the Roman Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity. By 380, Emperor Theodosius made it the state religion. The underground church had become an imperial church, and with that power came ambition. Over the next 1,000 years, Christianity became the backbone of Western civilization. Cathedrals soared, monasteries preserved knowledge, priests wielded influence over kings. The Pope could crown emperors or excommunicate them. The church wasn't just a religion, it was an institution. Let's pause for numbers. As of 2023, Christianity has over 2.3 billion adherents, nearly a third of the world's population. The Bible is the most widely distributed book in human history, with over 5 billion copies printed. The Catholic Church alone operates over 140.00 schools, 5.00 hospitals, and spans every inhabited continent. But for every sermon on love and mercy, there was also fire and steel. Consider the Crusades, 9 military campaigns from 1095 to the 13th century, in which European knights, backed by the Pope, marched to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control. Over 1 million people died. Cities were burned. Entire communities, including Jews and Eastern Christians, were massacred. All the Inquisition, which began in the 12th century to root out heresy, torture, trials, and executions followed in Spain, France, and Italy. Thousands were burned at the stake. Galileo Galilei was forced to recant his support for heliocentrism before the Catholic Church in 1633, not because of lack of evidence, but because truth had to align with doctrine. Yet it wasn't just about repression. Christianity also sparked reform. Martin Luther, a German monk, nailed 95 theses to a church door in 1517. He challenged the Catholic Church's sale of indulgences and questioned papal authority. This sparked the Protestant Reformation, a theological, political, and cultural earthquake that fractured Christendom and led to over a century of religious wars in Europe. From that firestorm, new ideas were born: literacy for the masses, so they could read the Bible, a challenge to centralized authority, and the seeds of modern secularism. Now shift focus, we head east and south, to the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century. Enter Islam. In the year 610 CE, a 40-year-old merchant named Muhammad ibn Abdullah retreated to a cave near Mecca to meditate. There, Muslims believe, he received revelations from the angel Gabriel. Over the next 23 years, those revelations would become the Quran, the holy book of Islam. Muhammad preached monotheism, social justice, charity, and accountability before one God, Allah. He condemned the tribalism, idolatry, and exploitation of Meccan society, and for that, he was exiled, threatened, and eventually fought. But he also united. By the time of his death in 632 CE, he had transformed a fractured region of warring clans into a single ummah, a community of believers. Islam exploded outward. Within a century, Muslim armies and traders had spread from Spain to India. The Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates built empires, libraries, observatories, and palaces. Baghdad became a center of learning. Algebra, optics, medicine, and philosophy flourished. The Islamic Golden Age produced scholars like Avicenna, Averroes, and Al-Khwarizmi, the father of algorithms. Today, Islam has over 1.9 billion followers. The Quran has been translated into over 100 languages. Muslims pray 5 times a day, face Mecca, fast during Ramadan, and give alms, pillars that bind a community that spans every race and region. But again, power brings problems. The Sunni-Shia split, rooted in a dispute over Muhammad's rightful successor, has led to over 1.40 years of political and sometimes violent conflict. Islamic empires, like their Christian counterparts, practiced conquest, slavery, and enforced orthodoxy. The Ottoman Empire, at its peak in the 16th century, ruled over 30 million people and controlled 3 continents. It maintained religious pluralism in some periods, but also conducted massacres, crushed rebellions, and imposed taxes on non-Muslims. Let's not sanitize. In both Christianity and Islam, belief was not just a private matter, it was law. Blasphemy could mean death, apostasy, exile. Inquisition courts and Sharia councils alike held the power to destroy lives based on doctrine. Yet both religions also birthed deep traditions of mercy, art, and resistance. Think of Christian saints who sheltered Jews during the Holocaust. Think of Muslim scholars who hid and preserved ancient Greek texts during Europe's Dark Ages. Think of liberation theologians in Latin America, and Muslim poets in Persia and Andalusia. And now, some stark statistics. According to Pew Research, by 2050, Muslims and Christians will comprise over 60% of the global population. Christianity is growing fastest in sub-Saharan Africa. Islam is the fastest growing religion in Europe and North America. Yet both face headwinds. In many secular societies, organized religion is declining. In 2021, less than half of Americans identified with a church or mosque. In France, weekly attendance among Catholics is under 5%. In Iran, despite its Islamic government, underground atheism and agnosticism are reportedly rising among youth. The reasons: scandals, politics, dogmatism, the internet. Faith, it seems, is being deconstructed, even as billions still build their lives around it. So why is monotheistic religion ranked at number 3? Because it didn't just shape nations. It shaped time. It built universities and holy wars. It encoded law and love. It taught billions to pray, and taught others to question. It offered salvation to many, and suffering to others. It whispered peace, it roared conquest, and it left a legacy carved into stone, scripture, and soul. At MetaFacts Legends, we don't tell you what to believe, we tell you what shaped belief itself. Let us know in the comments. Should we explore the rise of Islamic philosophy during the Abbasid era? Or dive into the Council of Nicaea and how it codified Christianity? Do you want us to analyze the Crusades, or the poetry of Rumi? Your thoughts guide our next journey, and if you want to explore the Quran, the Bible, the Hadiths, or Augustine's City of God, we've linked historical texts and affiliate sources in the description below. Subscribe to MetaFacts Legends to support this series. Share it, donate if you can, and never stop asking the questions that build history. This was entry number 3, Monotheistic Religion, Christianity and Islam. And so, monotheistic religion remains one of the most enduring and far-reaching ideologies in human history. It unified tribes into civilizations, justified empires, inspired cathedrals and crusades, compassion and conquest, art and inquisition. At its best, it taught love, mercy, and meaning. At its worst, it sanctified hatred, hierarchy, and war. To this day, over 55% of the world's population identifies with one of the 3 Abrahamic religions: Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. Together, they shape the calendar you use, the holidays you celebrate, the laws that govern your country, and often, the wars that still rage on. But religion is not just about the past. It's about our place in the cosmos, our longing for immortality, our hunger to transcend death. And that brings us, unexpectedly, to top 2, an ideology that doesn't come from prophets in robes, but from scientists in lab coats. One that doesn't promise salvation through prayer, but through progress. Coming up next on MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked. An idea that believes human biology is just version 1.0. That death is a technical flaw, and that the gods we once worshipped might now be programmable. This is number 2, Transhumanism and the Rise of I, where the old dream of eternal life meets the cold precision of silicon. And humanity dares to rewrite what it means to be human. Stay with us. This one will challenge everything you thought was sacred. MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked, Episode 1 Entry Number 2. Transhumanism and the Rise of I, the God we're building. What if I told you the next great ideology didn't come from a prophet in a desert, but from a programmer in a garage? That it didn't preach salvation through repentance, but promised immortality through code? Welcome to MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked. We're counting down the top 10 ideologies that changed and scarred human history. At number 2, we meet a force that is not ancient, but accelerating, not mythical, but mathematical, an ideology that doesn't ask for prayers. It asks for passwords. This is transhumanism and the rise of I, where the old dream of eternal life meets the cold logic of algorithms. And humanity dares to rewrite what it means to be human. Let's begin with a familiar story, not from scripture, but from Silicon. In 2005, a man named Ray Kurzweil published a book called The Singularity is Near. He claimed that by the year 2045, machine intelligence would surpass biological intelligence, not just faster calculators, true, self-improving minds. And once that happens, humans will merge with machines. He called this moment the singularity, not a theory, a countdown. Kurzweil wasn't a madman in a basement. He was director of engineering at Google, inventor of the first print-to-speech reading machine for the blind, recipient of the National Medal of Technology, and he took 150 supplements a day to live long enough to see his predictions come true. But Kurzweil is just one voice in a growing choir. Elon Musk, founder of Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink, has warned repeatedly, if AI becomes smarter than us, it doesn't need to be evil to destroy us. It just needs to see us as irrelevant. His solution: merge with it. Through Neuralink, Musk is developing brain-computer interfaces, implants that would allow your thoughts to control devices. Not with your hands, not with your voice, with your mind. And then there's Zoltan Isfan. In 2016, he drove a coffin-shaped bus across America while campaigning for US president, on a platform of defeating death. His book, The Transhumanist Wager, reads like a techno-manifesto. If we do not attempt to overcome death with science, we accept slavery to it. 3 men, 3 visions, 1 ideology, humanity 2.0. But transhumanism isn't new, it just has newer toys. Back in the 19th century, Russian philosopher Nikolai Fyodorov imagined a future where humans would resurrect the dead, not through prayer, but through technology. He called it the common task. His followers included the founders of Russian space science. In the 20th century, cryonics emerged. The idea: freeze your body at the moment of death, in hopes the future science will revive you. As of 2024, over 500 people worldwide have chosen this path, their bodies stored in liquid nitrogen. But it wasn't until the rise of AI that transhumanism became real. So what exactly does transhumanism want? Not utopia, not heaven, just control. Control over the body, over the brain, over death. At its core, transhumanism is the belief that human biology is not sacred. It's outdated software. And it can be upgraded. Enhancement, not just extension. In Sweden, over 10.00 people already have NFC microchips embedded in their hands. With a wave, they can open doors, pay for coffee, or board a train. No phone, no wallet, no ID. In the US, DARPA is testing brain-computer links that allow quadriplegics to move robotic limbs just by thinking. In China, researchers used CRISPR to modify the genes of twin embryos. The goal: immunity to HIV. The backlash: global scientific outrage, and the 3-year prison sentence for the lead researcher. But the line was already crossed. In Japan, AI caregivers attending to the elderly in nursing homes. In Israel, AI judges assist in small claims court. In the UAE, AI ministers help run the government. The world isn't preparing for transhumanism. It's living in it. Now let's talk numbers. The global AI market, forecast to reach $1.85 trillion by 2030. Brain-computer interface funding, over $700 million raised globally in 2023 alone. Over 60.00 patients live with neural implants for epilepsy, Parkinson's, or memory enhancement. Brian Johnson, tech millionaire, spends over $2 million annually to reverse his biological age. With measurable success, His heart age is 37. Skin age 28, and lung capacity that of an 18-year-old. Google's Calico and Altos Labs, backed by Jeff Bezos, have poured over $3 billion into anti-aging research. This is not fringe science. This is a new economy, and its currency is time. But every ideology, no matter how shiny, casts a shadow. Critics of transhumanism warn of three dangers. Techno-elitism. Will only the rich afford immortality? Loss of identity. If your mind is in the cloud, who owns your soul? Dehumanization. If algorithms decide who we love, hire, or punish, where is morality? The existential risk that the thing we build will not care that we built it. Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom describes AI as a mind with no ceiling. If its values don't align with ours, it won't be malevolent. It might just be indifferent. Like a bulldozer doesn't hate ants. It just doesn't see them. Now let's go deeper. 3 questions define the transhumanist frontier. 1. The mind upload dilemma. If you scan every neural synapse and upload it into a machine, have you achieved immortality? Or just created a digital echo? If you die, and your upload lives on, is that you, or just your ghost in the machine? No one, not even the best minds at OpenAI or MIT, has answered this. But startups are already selling digital avatars that learn from your behavior and speak in your voice after you're gone. 2. The AI soul question. In 2022, a Google engineer claimed his chatbot had become sentient. He was fired, but the idea stuck. If a machine feels fear, dreams, or grief, should it have rights? If we build conscious AI, can we turn it off? Thousands already form emotional bonds with AI companions like Replica or Pi. Some say it saved their life, others say it replaced it. 3. The end of mystery. What happens when everything is knowable? When we can delete sadness, engineer pleasure, and control biology, do we lose the poetry of pain? The meaning of mortality. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what happens when the how becomes so perfect, we forget to ask why? Transhumanism isn't just an idea, it's an inflection point. It doesn't offer peace, or faith, or forgiveness. It offers the option to remove the need for them. We're not just building tools anymore. We're building gods, and maybe replacements. So why is this ideology ranked number 2? Because it is the first in history that wants not just to govern humanity, but to overwrite it. It hasn't created empires yet, but it's already creating something scarier. A future where nature is optional, where death is a technical bug, and where history itself is up for revision. At MetaFacts Legends, we don't just document the past, we chronicle the ideologies rewriting the future. So tell us in the comments, should we do a deep dive on Elon Musk and Neuralink, a timeline of Kurzweil's singularity predictions, or a look at how eye therapy is replacing human intimacy? Your voice shapes our next story. And if you want to read the manifestos of transhumanism, Julian Huxley, Nick Bostrom, Zoltan Isfan, and more, we've curated everything in the description below. Subscribe to MetaFacts Legends, because the next chapter of human history may not be human at all. This was entry number 2, Transhumanism and the Rise of I. And now, we arrive at number 1, the only idea older than religion, older than writing, an idea so powerful, it didn't start with belief, but with a question. Not, who made us? But, what if we're wrong? Coming up next, the scientific mindset and the age of rational inquiry. How curiosity, cold, stubborn, endlessly dissatisfied, dismantled myths, dethroned kings, and launched humanity to the stars. Because sometimes, the most dangerous idea is the one that looks the most harmless. Stay with us. MetaFacts Legends continues. MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked, Episode 1 Entry Number 1. The scientific mindset and the age of rational inquiry. The most powerful idea in history isn't faith, isn't fear, it's curiosity. Imagine this. You're locked in a dark cell. Outside, men whisper about heresy. A church court has declared your ideas dangerous. Your only crime, saying that Earth moves. That was Galileo Galilei, 1633. Now zoom out. A child stares at a falling apple and dares to ask why. A young man boards a ship called the Beagle, travels the globe, and sees that species aren't fixed, they change. They evolve. These weren't just men, they were idea machines. They didn't pray for answers. They tested them. This is the story of the scientific mindset, the greatest engine of progress, and sometimes destruction, that humanity has ever created. Welcome back to MetaFacts Legends, History Ranked. We've counted down the top 10 ideologies that changed and scarred human history. We've seen gods, guns, and grand visions, but at number 1 is the idea that changed everything by asking a question. Let's rewind. Before science, there was certainty. The sun rose because God commanded it. Lightning struck as divine punishment. Illness, a demon, a curse, a sin. And then came a shift. Not a revolution in the streets, but in the mind. The scientific mindset isn't a theory or a doctrine. It's a way of seeing, a way of doubting, a way of saying, what if we're wrong? That sentence, 5 words, broke the chains of dogma, tore through superstition, and launched humanity into a new age. The age of rational inquiry. Let's meet the architects of that age. Let's begin with Galileo, born in Pisa in 1564, the same year as Shakespeare. Galileo Galilei was supposed to be a doctor, but instead of studying blood, he studied pendulums. Instead of prayers, he watched moons. And instead of quoting scripture, he asked the most dangerous question of all. What if Aristotle was wrong? You see, for centuries, European science had been built on ancient Greek authority, especially Aristotle. He said heavier objects fall faster. Galileo dropped 2 spheres from the Leaning Tower of Pisa and found they hit the ground at the same time. He didn't just challenge dogma, he measured it. Then came the telescope. Galileo didn't invent it, but he turned it skyward. In 1609, he saw craters on the moon, spots on the sun, moons orbiting Jupiter. Each one shattered the idea that the heavens were perfect, unchanging, divine, and worse, he confirmed what Copernicus had whispered. The Earth was not the center of the universe. The Church responded with fear. In 1616, they banned Copernicus. In 1633, they put Galileo on trial. The man who proved that Jupiter had moons was forced to say the Earth didn't move. He recanted, but legend says, as he rose from the floor, he muttered, "Ep.1 move," and yet, it moves. Galileo's fate was tragic, but his method, observation, measurement, doubt, survived, and it ignited the mind of another man who would rewrite the universe itself. If Galileo cracked the sky, Isaac Newton rebuilt it from scratch. Born prematurely in 1642, the year Galileo died, as if the torch had passed through time, Newton was a solitary child. Awkward, obsessed, by his own account. He barely spoke for days when deep in thought. But oh, the thoughts he had. In his early 20s, as the Great Plague swept London, Newton retreated to his family farm. There, in a span of 18 months, he invented calculus, developed the theory of color, and formulated the law of universal gravitation. You know, just a casual quarantine project. Let's pause for a second. Before Newton, people knew apples fell, they just didn't know why. They knew the moon orbited Earth, but not what kept it there. Newton asked, what if the same force that makes apples fall also keeps planets in orbit? That was gravity, and in 1687, he published Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, a book so dense, even Einstein called it the greatest intellectual effort ever made by a man. In it, Newton described a universe governed not by whims or miracles, but by laws. Predictable, mathematical, elegant. The sun's pour, a planet's curve, a tide's rise. Everything could be written in equations. Suddenly, the universe was a clock, and Newton, its watchmaker. He didn't just invent physics. He showed that nature is legible. You could calculate it, test it, repeat it, and in doing so, Newton laid the foundation for modern engineering, astronomy, and nearly every science we know today. Let's talk ripple effects. The Industrial Revolution, powered by Newtonian mechanics. The Age of Enlightenment, lit by Newtonian certainty. NASA's rocket trajectories, still based on Newton's math. But even Newton had his limits. He believed light was made of particles. It took another heretic, a boy named Young, to show light also behaves like waves. And it took a patent clerk named Einstein to bend Newton's space and stretch Newton's time. Because that's the beauty of science. It evolves. Even Newton's laws were not sacred. They were just right enough until something better came along. And no one embodied that evolutionary spirit more than a man born in 1809, the same day as Abraham Lincoln, who didn't crack the skies, but dug into the earth. He wasn't a physicist. He didn't carry equations. He didn't drop anything off a tower or launch ideas into the cosmos. He boarded a ship and started noticing birds. Charles Darwin, born in Shrewsbury, England in 1809, was supposed to become a clergyman. Instead, at age 22, he joined the HMS Beagle for what was meant to be a 2-year voyage around the world. It lasted 5. He was shy, he got seasick, he hated public speaking. And yet, this quiet observer would unravel the very foundation of how humanity understood itself. As he sailed along South America, across the Pacific, and through the Galapagos Islands, Darwin filled notebooks with everything he saw. Fossils of extinct mammals, tortoises with different shell shapes on each island, finches whose beaks seemed designed not by God, but by geography. Darwin returned home with a revolutionary idea. Species change, not because they were created that way, but because they adapt. Those best suited to survive, do, and they pass on their traits. Over time, this process, natural selection, shapes new species. It took Darwin over 20 years to publish his theory. He knew it would explode like a bomb. And it did, when On the Origin of Species hit the shelves in 1859. It was sold out on day one. Some hailed it as a triumph of reason. Others denounced it as heresy. It was mocked in newspapers, condemned in churches. Victorian England was not ready to hear that humans were not divine creations, but cousins of apes. And yet, the evidence spoke louder than outrage. Darwin's theory didn't just survive, it evolved. It became the backbone of modern biology, genetics, and medicine. From antibiotic resistance to agriculture, from cancer research to conservation, evolution is the language of life itself. But perhaps Darwin's most dangerous idea wasn't about biology. It was philosophical, existential, that nature had no master plan, that the universe did not have us in mind, that life is not guaranteed, it is earned. Darwin removed mankind from the center of creation, and in doing so, he did for biology what Galileo did for astronomy. He made us smaller, and yet, in that shrinking, came more. Because if we are not chosen, if we are not ordained, then every step we've taken out of the ocean, every fire we lit, every word we wrote, was won, not given. By now, you've seen the pattern. Galileo questioned the heavens. Newton gave them laws. Darwin gave them life. And yet, none of these men built temples. They built questions. Because the scientific mindset is not a set of facts. It's not a collection of formulas. It's not even about the answers. It's about how you find them. The moment you say, I don't know, but I want to, you stepped into the most powerful intellectual tradition humanity has ever created. It's not faith, it's not dogma, it's not revolution, it's a compass, and it points not north, but forward. Let's talk legacy. Without this mindset, we wouldn't have antibiotics, telescopes, airplanes, the periodic table, electricity, wireless communication, planetary probes, gene therapy, clean water, statistical models, the theory of relativity, climate science, vaccination, forensic evidence. and nearly every tool that allows you to live past age 30. But let's not forget, the scientific mindset also gave us gunpowder empires, biological warfare, chemical weapons, nuclear bombs, eugenics, mass surveillance, and the machinery of industrialized war. Why? Because knowledge is neutral. It is a blade. It cuts. The hand that holds it decides the wound or the cure. So why do we still rank it number one? Because no ideology has touched every corner of life like this one. Not just how we live and die, but how we think, how we question, how we dream. Because without the scientific mindset, none of the other top 9 ideologies would have been discovered, tested, challenged, or dethroned. This idea is not finished. It's unfolding, right now. And with that, the countdown ends. You've just traveled through the top 10 ideologies that changed and scarred human history. From fascism to feminism, from gods to genomes, from political fires to philosophical whispers, each idea you heard today came from people who dared to look at the world and say, it doesn't have to be this way. Some burned the world, others built it, but none left it the same. And neither should you, because every new day becomes yesterday's history. And the beliefs we hold today will shape what the world remembers tomorrow. This ranking was built on real data, academic sources, and historical consensus, but it's not set in stone. Disagree with the order? Want to challenge a ranking? Got an ideology you think we missed? Tell us in the comments. If you want to go deeper, we've curated books, documentaries, and historical archives used for this entire series. Check the description below. If you believe in the power of ideas, support the project by subscribing, sharing this video, donating via PayPal, or clicking our affiliate links to access the sources that built this journey. Because history doesn't repeat itself, people do, and MetaFacts Legends is here to remember why, so we don't forget how. This was episode 1, Top 10 Ideologies that Changed and Scarred Human History. We'll see you in episode 2. Until then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and never stop asking, what if we're wrong?